The sickening crack of porcelain against skull echoed through the empty girl's restroom as they shoved her head toward the toilet bowl. Zara Sterling had been at Preston Academy for exactly 3 days, keeping her head down, playing the role of the shy new girl perfectly, until these entitled rich boys decided to teach her a lesson about knowing her place. What they didn't know was that beneath her trembling exterior lived the most feared hacker in the digital underworld, someone who had brought down criminal empires with nothing but a laptop and cold determination. And they had just made the biggest mistake of their privileged lives. Zara Sterling stood in front of Preston Academy's imposing iron gates, her second-hand backpack hanging off one shoulder as she studied the fortress of wealth and privilege before her. At 17, she had the kind of unremarkable appearance that let her fade into any crowd medium height. Mousy brown hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Clothes from discount stores that screamed middle class trying to fit in with the ultra-rich. Her gray eyes behind cheap wireframe glasses darted nervously across the manicured lawns, and students stepping out of luxury cars worth more than most people's houses. Everything about her screamed vulnerable newcomer. Easy prey for the sharks that swam in these expensive waters. The scholarship letter crinkled in her jacket pocket as she took her first steps onto campus. Full ride to one of the most exclusive private schools in the country, courtesy of her stellar academic record, and a carefully crafted sob story about a widowed mother struggling to make ends meet. The admissions committee had eaten it up, seeing her as their token charity case, proof that Preston Academy cared about more than just trust fund babies and legacy admissions. If they had dug even slightly deeper into her background, they would have discovered that Zara Sterling didn't really exist until 6 months ago, that her entire identity was as carefully constructed as the code she wrote in the dark corners of the internet. The real Zara, the one hidden beneath layers of digital encryption and false identities, went by a different name in the underworld of hackers and cybercriminals. They called her Phantom, and her reputation was the stuff of digital legend. At 13, she had infiltrated a human trafficking rings network and delivered evidence that led to dozens of arrests across 3 continents. By 15, she had exposed corruption in multiple government agencies, always staying 10 steps ahead of the authorities trying to track her down. Now at 17, she was taking on her most dangerous assignment yet, one that required her to go undercover in the belly of the beast itself. Preston Academy wasn't just a school for rich kids, it was a breeding ground for the next generation of power brokers, corrupt politicians, and white-collar criminals. Someone inside these walls was running a sophisticated money laundering operation, using student organizations and school funds to clean dirty money for some very dangerous people. Zara's handler in the FBI's cybercrimes division had spent 2 years trying to crack the case from the outside, but they needed someone on the inside. Someone who could blend in while having the skills to penetrate their digital defenses. Enter Zara Sterling, scholarship, student, and computer science prodigy, hiding the most dangerous hacker in America behind bargain store clothes and nervous smiles. The main hallway of Preston Academy looked more like a 5-star hotel than a high school. Marble floors polished to mirror perfection. Oil paintings of distinguished alumni lining wood-paneled walls. Crystal chandeliers casting warm light over students who wore designer clothes like uniforms. Zara clutched her class schedule and tried to navigate through clusters of students who looked at her with the kind of casual disdain reserved for servants and service workers. She could hear the whispers starting already. See the way they cataloged her, obviously fake designer knockoff bag. Hair drugstore makeup, her nervous energy that marked her as prey. She found her locker in the East Wing, fumbling with the combination as a group of girls in matching Chanel blazers swept past, their laughter sharp as broken glass. One of them, a blonde with the kind of aggressive perfection that came from personal trainers and plastic surgeons, paused to look Zara up and down with theatrical disgust. "Scholarship?" she asked, making the word sound like a disease. Zara nodded mutely, playing her role perfectly. The blonde's smile was all teeth and no warmth. "How wonderful that Preston does charity work. Try not to touch anything expensive. Sweetie, you probably can't afford to replace it." They moved on in a cloud of expensive perfume, leaving Zara to organize her books and begin mapping the school's layout in her mind. Every camera placement, every network access point, Every potential vulnerability in their security system was being cataloged and stored for later analysis. She had 3 objectives at Preston: maintain her cover as a harmless scholarship student, identify the key players in the money laundering operation, and gather enough digital evidence to bring the whole thing crashing down. The first 2 would require patience and careful observation. The third would require skills that none of these privileged brats could even imagine. Her first class was AP Computer Science, which almost made her laugh. The idea of sitting through basic programming lessons when she could code in her sleep was absurd, but it was necessary for her cover. She took a seat in the back corner, setting up her ancient laptop that looked like a relic compared to the latest MacBooks surrounding her. The teacher, Mr. Harrison, was explaining basic network architecture when 3 boys entered late, not bothering to apologize for the disruption. They moved with the easy confidence of those who had never faced real consequences. Their Preston blazers custom-tailored. Their watches worth more than most people's cars. The leader was obvious from the way the other 2 flanked him like bodyguards. Alexander Pemberton, heir to a pharmaceutical fortune and undisputed king of Preston's social hierarchy. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his jaw sharp enough to cut glass. His brown eyes holding the kind of cruel intelligence that made him genuinely dangerous rather than just another pretty rich boy. His lieutenants were equally privileged but clearly subordinate. Chase Rothschild, whose family owned half the commercial real estate in the city, and Ethan Fitzgerald, son of a senator, who was rumored to have some very interesting connections to organized crime. Alexander's eyes swept the classroom and landed on Zara, with the precision of a predator identifying the weakest member of the herd. His lips curved in a smile that made her skin crawl, even as she forced herself to look away nervously. Playing the part of the intimidated new girl, he said something to his friends that made them laugh. Their eyes fixed on her as they took seats directly behind her. She could feel their presence like a weight on her shoulders. Their whispered comments designed to be just loud enough for her to hear. "Looks like the cleaning lady's daughter got lost," Chase murmured. "Think she knows this is a classroom, not the janitor's closet?" Ethan added. Zara's fingers moved across her keyboard, ostensibly taking notes but actually probing the school's network defenses. They were surprisingly sophisticated for a high school, with multiple layers of encryption and security protocols that suggested someone here took digital security very seriously. Interesting. Very interesting. As Mr. Harrison droned on about firewalls, Zara identified 3 separate networks running parallel to the main school system, hidden beneath layers of false traffic and dummy protocols. One was clearly administrative. One appeared to be for the exclusive computer lab on the top floor. And the third was masked so cleverly that most hackers would have missed it entirely. The class ended with Alexander accidentally knocking her laptop off her desk as he passed. The ancient machine clattering on the marble floor. "Oops," he said, his voice dripping with false concern. "Hope that wasn't too expensive to replace." "Oh wait, it looks like you got it from a garage sale anyway." His friends laughed as they swept out of the room, leaving Zara to gather her things with shaking hands that weren't entirely an act. The laptop was fine. Of course, she had modified it to withstand much worse than a simple fall. But letting them think they had rattled her was part of the game. The rest of the morning followed a similar pattern. In every class, she was marked as an outsider, a target for casual cruelty and calculated humiliation. Someone poured coffee on her chair in English literature. Her homework was mysteriously missing from her folder in advanced mathematics. During passing periods, she was bumped and jostled in ways that looked accidental but were clearly deliberate. Through it all, she maintained her facade of the overwhelmed scholarship student. Even as her mind worked furiously to process the social dynamics and identify potential sources of information, lunch presented its own challenges. The cafeteria at Preston looked more like a high-end restaurant, with actual waitstaff serving gourmet meals to students who treated them with the casual indifference of those raised with servants. Zara took her tray of surprisingly excellent food and looked for a place to sit. Knowing that this daily ritual of rejection was part of establishing her cover, table after table was suddenly full as she approached. Students spreading out belongings or turning their backs with practiced cruelty. Finally, She found an empty table in the corner. Sitting alone while pretending not to notice the whispers and laughter directed her way, she was halfway through her lunch when Alexander Pemberton materialized beside her table like a well-dressed nightmare. His presence immediately drew attention from across the cafeteria, students watching to see what Preston's unofficial king would do to the new scholarship girl. "Eating alone?" he asked with mock sympathy. "How sad. Though I suppose it's better than inflicting your presence on people who actually matter." Zara looked up at him through her fake glasses, letting her voice quaver slightly. "I'm fine. Thank you." The dismissal in those simple words was subtle but clear, and she saw the flash of anger in his eyes. Alexander Pemberton was not used to being dismissed by anyone, especially not scholarship charity cases. "You know," he said, leaning down so his face was close to hers. "His cologne expensive and overwhelming. Preston Academy has certain standards, traditions, ways of doing things that someone like you might not understand. It would be a shame if you got confused about where you belong in the hierarchy here." The threat was polished but unmistakable, delivered with the confidence of someone who had never faced real consequences for his actions. Zara met his eyes for just a moment, letting him see a flash of something that wasn't quite fear before looking away. "I understand perfectly," she said quietly. Alexander straightened, satisfied that his message had been delivered. As he walked away, rejoining his friends at their table in the center of the cafeteria, Zara allowed herself a small smile. He thought he was the predator in this scenario. Thought she was just another helpless target for his amusement. He had no idea that he had just threatened someone who had taken down drug cartels and terrorist cells. Someone who could destroy his entire family's fortune with a few keystrokes, but that would come later. For now, she had a cover to maintain and information to gather. The afternoon brought more of the same treatment, but Zara endured it with the patience of someone playing a much longer game. In chemistry class, her lab partner refused to work with her, claiming she didn't want to risk her grade by pairing with someone who clearly didn't belong at Preston. In PE, she was chosen last for every activity, forced to stand alone while teams were picked with theatrical reluctance. The coach, like all the teachers, saw nothing wrong with this systematic isolation. After all, she should be grateful just to attend such a prestigious institution. It wasn't until after the final bell that the day took a truly dark turn. Zara had stayed behind in the computer lab, ostensibly to work on an assignment but actually to get her first real look at Preston's network architecture without the distraction of other students. She was deep in concentration, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she mapped digital pathways and identified potential access points. When she heard the door lock click behind her, the sound was quiet but unmistakable, and her body tensed even as she forced herself to continue typing as if she hadn't noticed. "Working late?" Alexander's voice was silk over steel. She turned to find him standing by the door with Chase and Ethan, their positioning blocking any potential escape route. The computer lab was in an isolated wing of the building, and she realized with a chill that they had waited until the halls were empty, until there would be no witnesses to whatever they had planned. "Just finishing up," she said, saving her work with hands that remained perfectly steady, despite the adrenaline flooding her system. "Here's the thing. Scholarship," Alexander said, moving closer with the lazy confidence of an apex predator. "We've been watching you all day, and we've come to a conclusion. You're not Preston material. You don't look right. You don't act right. And frankly, your presence here is lowering the overall quality of the student body." Chase laughed, the sound ugly in the quiet room. "We think you should transfer. Find somewhere more appropriate for someone of your background." Zara stood slowly, her mind calculating distances and angles, identifying potential weapons and escape routes. She could take all three of them down in seconds if necessary. But that would blow her cover beyond repair. "I have just as much right to be here as anyone," she said, letting her voice shake with what they would interpret as fear rather than suppressed rage. "My grades earned me this scholarship." "Your grades," Ethan sneered, "don't mean anything here. This isn't about grades. It's about class. Breeding. The kind of things you can't learn from books." He picked up her laptop, examining it with theatrical disgust. "Look at this ancient piece of junk. probably held together with duct tape and hope. Just like everything else about you, what happened next would replay in Zara's mind for days afterward. Ethan raised the laptop over his head, clearly intending to smash it on the ground, when his phone suddenly erupted in a cacophony of alerts, then Chase's phone, then Alexander's. Within seconds, all three devices were screaming with notifications, their screens flashing rapidly between different apps and images. The laptop slipped from Ethan's suddenly nerveless fingers as he grabbed for his phone, his face paling as he saw what was displaying on the screen. "What the hell?" Alexander snarled, stabbing at his phone screen, trying to stop the flood of information pouring across it. Bank statements, private messages, deleted photos, encrypted files. All of it was being exposed in a digital avalanche that he was powerless to stop. Zara watched with carefully hidden satisfaction as their arrogance crumbled into panic. She had triggered this particular program as a failsafe, a warning shot across the bow. It would stop in 30 seconds, leaving them shaken but not destroyed. Not yet. Make it stop. Chase was practically screaming, watching his phone display message after message that he had thought was safely deleted. Evidence of his father's insider trading, photos from parties that would destroy college applications, conversations that revealed just how deep the corruption at Preston really went. The phones went dark simultaneously, leaving the three boys standing in stunned silence. Zara calmly picked up her laptop and placed it in her bag, her movements deliberate and controlled. "That was just a taste," she said quietly, her voice carrying a steel they hadn't heard before. "A demonstration. Touch me or my property again. And the next time won't stop after 30 seconds. The next time, everything you've ever tried to hide will be sent to every news outlet, law enforcement agency, and social media platform in existence. Your parents' crimes, your personal scandals, every dirty little secret your families have buried with money and influence, all of it will see the light of day." She moved toward the door, pausing as she passed Alexander. "You asked about class and breeding? Let me educate you. Class isn't about money or family names. It's about how you treat people when you think you have power over them. And you just failed that test spectacularly." The lock clicked open without her touching it, a small demonstration of the control she had over the school's electronic systems. As she walked out, leaving them frozen in shock and dawning fear, she heard Ethan whisper, "How is that possible? Who is she?" That night, Zara sat in her small apartment off campus. The one the FBI had arranged as part of her cover, her real equipment was set up here. Military-grade hardware hidden behind false panels and encrypted connections. She reviewed the day's intelligence, mapping the social networks and power structures of Preston Academy. Alexander Pemberton and his crew were clearly more than just bullies. The fear in their eyes when their phones were compromised suggested they had secrets worth protecting. Secrets that might be connected to the money laundering operation she was investigating. She pulled up the files she had captured during those 30 seconds of chaos. Chase Rothschild's phone had contained references to offshore accounts and shell companies. Ethan Fitzgerald had messages discussing cash movements through what appeared to be legitimate student organizations. And Alexander had something much more interesting. Buried in his encrypted folders were communications with someone identified only as the architect, discussing something called the Preston pipeline. The messages were carefully coded, but Zara recognized the patterns of criminal communication, the ways people talked when they knew surveillance was always a possibility. Her handler, Agent Sarah Chen, appeared on her secure video connection at exactly midnight. "How was your first day?" she asked, her expression serious, despite the seemingly casual question. Zara smiled grimly. "Educational? I've already identified several persons of interest and uncovered what might be a major lead. Something called the Preston pipeline, possibly connected to Alexander Pemberton." "Pemberton?" Sarah's eyebrows rose. "His father is being considered for a federal judgeship. If the son is involved in money laundering..." She trailed off, understanding the implications. A federal judge's son connected to organized crime would be a massive scandal, the kind that could bring down entire networks of corruption. "Be careful, Zara. These people have resources. We're only beginning to understand. Your cover is solid, But if they suspect who you really are, they won't, Zara assured her. Right now, they think I'm just a scholarship student who happens to be good with computers. They're scared, but not suspicious. I'll maintain that balance while I dig deeper into their operations. After the call ended, she sat in the darkness, planning her next moves. The confrontation in the computer lab had been unplanned but potentially useful. Fear would make them sloppy, and sloppy criminals made mistakes that left digital fingerprints everywhere. The next morning, Zara arrived at Preston to find the atmosphere noticeably different. Students who had ignored her yesterday were now watching her with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. Word had clearly spread about something happening with Alexander and his friends. Though the details seemed to be murky, she heard whispers about phones being hacked, about the 3 most powerful boys in school looking terrified, about the scholarship girl somehow being involved, but without concrete details. The rumors remained just that, rumors that added to her mystique without compromising her mission. Alexander was absent from computer science, as were Chase and Ethan. Their empty seats felt like a victory, but Zara knew it was temporary. They would regroup, possibly investigate who she really was, potentially become more dangerous than ever. She needed to move fast, to gather evidence before they could mount a proper defense, or worse, call in whatever criminal connections their families maintained. During lunch, she noticed other students giving her a wider berth than yesterday. But now it felt less like disdain and more like uncertainty. She was no longer just the pathetic scholarship girl, she was something unknown, potentially dangerous. It was during her free period that everything went wrong. Zara had been using the time to remotely access Preston's financial servers, following digital breadcrumbs that led from student organization accounts to offshore holdings. She was so focused on her work that she didn't notice the trap until it was too late. The bathroom door opened behind her, and she heard multiple sets of footsteps on the tile floor. She turned from the sink to find herself facing not just Alexander, Chase, and Ethan, but 2 other boys she didn't recognize, older and harder looking than the usual Preston students. "Hello, Zara," Alexander said, his voice different from yesterday's arrogant drawl. There was something colder in it now, more calculated. "We need to have a conversation about boundaries and respect." The bathroom was in the old wing of the school, rarely used and far from any security cameras. They had chosen their location carefully, and Zara felt the first real spike of concern since beginning this mission. These weren't just spoiled rich boys anymore. The 2 newcomers had the look of real muscle, probably college-age brothers or private security, brought in specifically to deal with her. 5 against 1, she said, keeping her voice steady while calculating angles and options. That seems excessive for a simple conversation. Alexander smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You see, after our encounter yesterday, we did some research. Zara Sterling is a ghost. Your records only go back 6 months. Your previous address don't exist. Your mother's employment history is fabricated. So the question becomes, who are you really? And what are you doing at our school?" The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. They hadn't just been scared by her demonstration. They had investigated, used their family's resources to dig into her background. While her cover was solid enough to fool a standard background check, it wouldn't hold up against the kind of scrutiny that real money could buy. They knew she wasn't who she claimed to be, which made her a threat to whatever operations they were running through Preston Academy. One of the older boys moved to block the door, while the other positioned himself behind her. Professional positioning, tactical awareness. These weren't just random thugs, but trained security, possibly ex-military. The situation had escalated far beyond what she had anticipated, and for the first time since arriving at Preston, Zara felt genuinely threatened, not by the boys themselves. She had faced worse, but by the implications of what would happen if she had to break cover to defend herself. "I don't know what you think you found," she began. But Alexander cut her off with a sharp gesture. "Don't insult our intelligence. You're either a cop, a Fed, or a rival family's spy. Either way, you made a mistake coming here, threatening us, thinking we were just stupid kids you could intimidate with some basic hacking." He nodded to one of the older boys, who pulled out what looked like a police-grade electromagnetic pulse device. This will fry every electronic device in a 50-foot radius. No phones, no recordings, no calling for help. Just us having a very private discussion about your immediate future. Zara's mind raced through options as the boy activated the device. She felt her phone die in her pocket, saw the lights flicker as the EMP pulse washed over them. They had effectively cut her off from her digital weapons, reducing this to a physical confrontation where their numbers gave them a significant advantage, but they had made one crucial mistake. They assumed that her power came from her devices, that without her digital tools, she was just a helpless teenage girl. They were about to learn exactly how wrong that assumption was. "Last chance?" Alexander said, stepping closer. "Tell us who you really are and who sent you. And maybe you leave here with just a few bruises and a strong suggestion to transfer schools immediately. Keep playing dumb. And well, accidents happen in old buildings. Pipes burst. People slip and hit their heads. Tragic, really." The threat was delivered with the casual confidence of someone who had never faced real consequences, who believed that money and power made him untouchable. That was when they heard the sirens. The sirens weren't coming for them. But Alexander and his crew didn't know that. The momentary distraction as they all turned toward the sound was all Zara needed. She moved with the fluid precision of someone who had trained in combat since childhood, her elbow connecting with the solar plexus of the man behind her, while her foot swept the legs of the one blocking the door. Both men went down hard, their surprise at being attacked by a teenage girl costing them precious seconds of reaction time. By the time they started to recover, Zara had already vaulted over the larger one and was sprinting down the hallway, her footsteps echoing off the marble floors. Behind her, she could hear Alexander screaming orders and the thunder of pursuit, but she had the advantage of knowing exactly where she was going. During her reconnaissance of the school, she had memorized every route, every hiding spot, every potential escape path. She ducked into a maintenance corridor, her fingers flying over the mechanical lock that should have required a keycard, but yielded to her lock-picking skills in seconds. The door clicked shut behind her just as her pursuers rounded the corner, buying her precious time to navigate the narrow service passages that ran like arteries through Preston Academy's glamorous facade. Her phone was dead from the EMP, but Zara had prepared for this possibility. Hidden in her shoe was a tiny emergency transmitter, hardened against electromagnetic pulses and designed for exactly this kind of situation. She activated it with a practiced motion, sending a coded distress signal to Agent Chen that would bring backup within minutes. But minutes felt like hours when you were being hunted through a building by people who wanted you dead or worse. She could hear them splitting up, their voices echoing through the walls as they coordinated their search with the efficiency of a well-funded private security team. Zara emerged from the maintenance tunnels in the science wing, her clothes dusty but her determination intact. She needed to get to the computer lab, to access the hardwired systems that would have survived the localized EMP blast. If she could get online for even 30 seconds, she could trigger the nuclear option, releasing everything she had gathered about Preston Academy's criminal operations to law enforcement agencies across the country. But first, she had to survive the next few minutes. The sound of footsteps on the stairs told her that at least one team was closing in on her position. She slipped into an empty chemistry classroom, her eyes immediately cataloging potential weapons and defensive positions. The chemical storage cabinet was locked, but locks had never been an obstacle for her. Within seconds, she had it open and was mixing compounds with the speed and precision of someone who had studied more than just computer science. The resulting concoction wouldn't kill anyone, but it would certainly discourage pursuit. She positioned herself behind a lab table just as the door burst open, Chase Rothschild leading the charge with one of the security professionals right behind him. The improvised smoke bomb filled the room with thick, acrid clouds that sent both men stumbling backward, coughing and cursing. Zara used the cover to slip past them, but not before liberating Chase's phone from his pocket with fingers that had been picking pockets since she was old enough to walk. Even if the device was temporarily disabled by the EMP, it would contain evidence once she could get it to her technical team. She was 3 steps into the hallway when a hand grabbed her shoulder, spinning her around to face Ethan Fitzgerald's furious expression. Got you, he snarled, raising his fist. But Zara had been trained by people who made Preston Academy's bullies look like choir boys. She redirected his punch with an Aikido move that sent him crashing into the lockers, his own momentum working against him. Before he could recover, she had zip-tied his wrists to the locker handle, a trick she had learned during a summer spent infiltrating human trafficking rings. His shouts of rage followed her as she ran, but she was already planning her next move. The computer lab was her destination, but Alexander would know that. He had seen her skills firsthand and would anticipate her trying to get back online. Sure enough, as she approached the lab's hallway, she saw him standing guard with the remaining security operative, both positioned to intercept her. But Zara hadn't survived this long by being predictable. Instead of approaching directly, she ducked into an adjacent classroom and accessed the building's ventilation system through a maintenance panel she had noted during her earlier reconnaissance. The ductwork was cramped and dusty, but it was also a highway that bypassed all of Alexander's careful positioning. She moved through it with practiced silence, years of infiltration experience guiding her past potential noise hazards. Below her, she could hear Alexander talking on what must have been a hardened phone, one protected from the EMP blast. His words made her blood run cold. He wasn't just calling for more security, he was activating something called Protocol 7. Talking about containment and cleanup in terms that suggested this wasn't the first time someone had threatened their operations. She dropped through a ceiling tile into the computer lab, landing silently on the balls of her feet. The main terminals were dark, victims of the EMP, but the server room in the back would be shielded. All modern server rooms had electromagnetic protection to prevent data loss from power surges or targeted attacks. She just needed to get through one more locked door, and she could bring their entire criminal empire crashing down. Her lockpicks were already in her hand when the lights in the lab suddenly went out, plunging the room into darkness. Clever girl. Alexander's voice came from somewhere in the darkness, but not clever enough. You see, we've been running operations through Preston for years. Do you really think you're the first person to try to expose us? The difference is, the others didn't have families we could threaten, identities we could destroy, lives we could ruin, but you, Zara Sterling, or whatever your real name is, you made it personal when you threatened us yesterday, and that means we take our time with you. Emergency lighting flickered on, casting eerie shadows across the lab. Alexander stood by the door with two more men she hadn't seen before, older and more dangerous looking than anyone she had encountered so far. These weren't college-age muscle or private security. These were professionals, probably mob enforcers or worse, the kind of men who made people disappear without a trace. But Zara had something they didn't expect. She had already uploaded everything to a dead man's switch during her previous visit to the lab. If she didn't input a code every 12 hours, all the evidence would be automatically released. In about 10 hours, she said calmly, every law enforcement agency in the country will receive detailed documentation of your money laundering operations, financial records, communication logs, even video evidence of your father meeting with known crime figures. The only way to stop it is with a code that only I know. Kill me, hurt me, even detain me too long, and your entire family goes down for racketeering, money laundering, and conspiracy. Alexander's face went pale, but one of the professionals stepped forward with a cold smile. Nice bluff, kid, but we've been doing this longer than you've been alive. Dead man switches can be found and disabled if you know where to look, and we have people who know exactly where to look. He pulled out a phone, showing her a live feed of her apartment. FBI agents unconscious on the floor, while masked figures tore through her equipment. Your handler sold you out. Turns out even federal agents have a price if you know what buttons to push. The revelation hit Zara like a physical blow. Agent Chen, who she had trusted with her life, who had guided her through dozens of operations, had betrayed her for money. It explained how they had been able to identify her so quickly, how they knew exactly when and where to strike. She had been set up from the beginning, sent into Preston Academy not to investigate but to be eliminated by the very criminals she was hunting. The mission had been a trap, and she had walked right into it. But if they thought despair would make her give up, they had severely underestimated her. Zara Blackwood hadn't survived the foster system, hadn't taught herself to code in libraries and homeless shelters, hadn't built herself into the most feared hacker in the digital underground by giving up when things looked hopeless. She had one more card to play, one that even Agent Chen hadn't known about. During her time in the ventilation system, she had planted something in the ductwork directly above the server room, a small device of her own creation, hardened against EMPs and containing enough thermite to burn through the floor. "You're right," she said, reaching slowly into her pocket. The dead man's switch was a bluff. "But this isn't—" She pulled out what looked like a simple car key fob, her thumb hovering over the button. "Thermite charge directly above your servers. One click and everything burns. All your financial records, all your encrypted communications, everything you need to keep your operations running. Your choice. Let me walk out of here, or watch your empire burn." The professional enforcer laughed, a sound without humor. "You'd be killing yourself too. Thermite burns at over 4,000 degrees. This whole room would become an inferno." Zara met his eyes steadily. "I've been ready to die for my mission since I was 13 years old. Can you say the same about yours?" The standoff stretched taut, everyone frozen in a tableau of mutual destruction. That was when they heard the helicopters. The sound was unmistakable. Military-grade aircraft approaching fast. Through the windows, searchlights began sweeping the grounds of Preston Academy. A voice boomed through loudspeakers. "This is the FBI. Preston Academy is surrounded. All students and staff are ordered to shelter in place. Anyone attempting to leave the premises will be detained." Alexander looked at the professionals in confusion. "You said Chen was handled? You said we were protected." The lead enforcer's phone rang, and his face went ashen as he listened to whoever was on the other end. "It's not local FBI," he said quietly. "It's a federal task force out of Washington. Someone triggered a national security alert about terrorist financing. They're not here for money laundering. They think we're funding terrorism." Zara allowed herself a small smile. Her real handler hadn't been Agent Chen at all. That had been another layer of cover, another deception to protect her true mission. Chen had been under investigation for months, and Zara had been the bait to expose both her and the Preston pipeline. "My name," she said clearly, "is Agent Sarah Walker, Department of Homeland Security, Cyber Terrorism Division, and you're all under arrest for conspiracy to provide material support to terrorist organizations." It was partly true. Sarah Walker was one of her many identities, and she did occasionally work with DHS when her skills were needed. The fact that she was 17 and not officially employed by any agency was a technicality that could be sorted out later. Right now, she needed these men to believe that killing her would bring down the full weight of the federal government on their heads. The sound of boots in the hallway made the decision for them. The professionals shared a look and made a tactical decision, disappearing through a side door with the speed of men who had extensive practice at evading law enforcement. Alexander stood frozen, his world crumbling around him as federal agents poured into the computer lab. Chase and Ethan were dragged in moments later. Chase still coughing from the smoke bomb, and Ethan with zip tie marks on his wrists. The looks they gave Zara were a mixture of terror and dawning comprehension. The lead agent, a woman in her 40s with steel gray hair and eyes like winter, surveyed the scene with professional interest. "Phantom," she said quietly, and Zara knew she had been recognized despite her cover. "We've been looking for you for a very long time." The agent's hand moved to her weapon, and Zara realized that her problems were far from over. The FBI might have taken down the Preston pipeline, but they also had a top 10 most wanted hacker in custody. A hacker who had just exposed massive corruption and saved countless lives, but a criminal nonetheless in their eyes. "Before you arrest me," Zara said quickly, "you might want to check your email. Specifically, the folder labeled Operation Classroom. You'll find detailed intelligence on 17 different money laundering operations running through private schools across the country, 3 terrorist financing networks, and evidence of corruption reaching into multiple federal agencies, including your own. All of it gathered during my time here. All of it inadmissible in court if obtained illegally by law enforcement, but perfectly legal if provided by a concerned citizen." The agent's phone buzzed, and her expression changed as she read whatever had just arrived. Around them, Other agents were securing the scene, seizing computers, and arresting anyone connected to Preston Academy's administration. Alexander was in handcuffs. His perfect hair mussed for probably the first time in his life. Staring at Zara with something approaching awe, she had played them all, criminals and law enforcement alike, orchestrating a massive sting operation while maintaining her cover as both a helpless scholarship student and a dangerous hacker. "The Attorney General wants to speak with you," the lead agent said finally, her tone carefully neutral. "It seems you've provided intelligence that several agencies have been trying to obtain for years. There's discussion of a deal, full immunity in exchange for your cooperation in ongoing investigations." Zara nodded, unsurprised. She had planned for this possibility, seeding her intelligence packages with enough valuable information to make her too useful to prosecute. The government needed her skills more than they needed to make an example of her. As she was escorted from Preston Academy, past crowds of shocked students and arriving news vans, Zara caught sight of the blonde girl from her first day, the one who had sneered at the scholarship student. The girl was crying, her perfect makeup running, as she realized her privileged world was collapsing. Her father was on the board of trustees, one of the many who had enabled the criminal operations in exchange for generous donations. By tomorrow, half of Preston's families would be under investigation, their wealth revealed as the product of money laundering and corruption. In the FBI vehicle, the lead agent turned to study her. 17 years old, she said, shaking her head. "How did you become Phantom? How does a child become one of the most wanted hackers in the world?" Zara looked out the window at Preston Academy, growing smaller in the distance. "When the system fails you enough times," she said quietly, "you learn to hack it. When the adults who are supposed to protect you are the ones hurting you, you find your own justice. I became Phantom because someone had to. Because in a world where money buys innocence and poverty ensures guilt, sometimes the only real justice comes from outside the system." The interrogation rooms at the federal building were surprisingly comfortable, more like conference rooms than the stark chambers shown in movies. Zara sat across from a rotating cast of agents, analysts, and prosecutors, walking them through the intricacies of the Preston pipeline and the larger network it connected to. She provided passwords, explained encryption methods, identified key players from photographs. In return, they offered her what she had always wanted, more than freedom or fame: the chance to use her skills legally, to be the sword rather than the shield. Alexander Pemberton's testimony, given in exchange for a reduced sentence, painted a picture of privilege corrupted from birth. His father had been using Preston Academy as a money laundering facility for over a decade, cleaning funds for everyone from drug cartels to terrorist organizations. The students were unwitting mules, their trust funds and organizational accounts used to move millions in dirty money. Alexander himself had been brought into the operation at 15, told it was the family business, threatened with disinheritance if he refused to participate. But it was Zara's digital evidence that truly broke the case open. Financial records showing wire transfers to offshore accounts, encrypted communications between school administrators and known crime figures, even video footage from hidden cameras in the administrative offices. The Preston pipeline wasn't just one school but a network of elite institutions across the country, all connected by greed and corruption. By the time she was finished, 300 arrests had been made, and over $2 billion in assets had been frozen. The deal they offered her was everything she had hoped for: full immunity for past actions, a new identity if she wanted it, and a position as a consultant with the Cyber Terrorism Division. She would finish high school through an accelerated program, attend college on the government's dime, and work part-time helping to track down other hackers and cyber criminals. It was a chance to come in from the cold, to use her skills for something greater than survival or revenge. She accepted without hesitation. 6 months later, Zara stood in front of another school, this one a public institution in suburban Maryland. Her appearance had changed slightly. The mousy brown hair, now a natural auburn. The cheap glasses replaced with designer frames that actually corrected her vision. She still dressed simply, but now it was by choice, rather than necessity. The students here didn't know her history. didn't know that she had brought down one of the largest money laundering operations in American history. To them, she was just Sarah Mitchell, the new transfer student with a gift for computers. But in the digital underground, the legend of Phantom lived on. Message boards buzzed with theories about what had happened to the famous hacker. Some said she had been killed by the government, others that she had sold out for money and comfort. A few, the smarter ones, suspected the truth that she had evolved into something more dangerous than a simple hacker. She had become a hunter of hunters, using her skills to take down those who preyed on the vulnerable. The FBI's cybercrime division saw a 40% increase in arrests over those 6 months. Though they never publicly acknowledged why, Preston Academy was shut down permanently. Its buildings converted into a community center for underprivileged youth. Alexander Pemberton got 5 years in minimum security, his cooperation and age earning him leniency. His father got life without parole. Chase and Ethan received probation and community service, their roles deemed minor enough to avoid prison. But all of them would carry the mark of their involvement forever. Their families' reputations destroyed, their futures forever altered by their encounter with the quiet girl they had tried to bully. On her 18th birthday, Zara received a package with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a message in code that only she would understand. It was from others like her, young hackers who had heard her story and been inspired to use their skills for justice rather than chaos. They called themselves the Phantom Network, and they wanted her to know that her legacy lived on in every corrupt system they exposed, every predator they brought to light, every victim they helped find justice. She burned the message after reading it, but the warmth it kindled in her chest remained. That night, she sat in her small apartment near the University of Maryland. Her government-issued laptop open to a secure terminal. On the screen were dozens of cases requiring her expertise, from terrorist financing networks to child exploitation rings. Each one represented lives that could be saved, justice that could be served, wrongs that could be righted. She selected one at random, her fingers already flying across the keyboard as she began to dig into the digital shadows where predators thought they were safe. They were wrong. They were never safe from her. The bullies at Preston Academy had made the mistake of targeting someone they thought was weak because she was different, poor, alone. They had learned too late that strength came in many forms, that the quiet ones were often the most dangerous, that in the digital age, a teenage girl with a laptop could bring down empires. Their story became a cautionary tale whispered in the halls of other elite schools, a warning to those who would use their privilege to hurt others. Be careful who you bully, the whispers said. You never know who might be a ghost in the machine, waiting for the perfect moment to show you exactly how powerless you really are.